let's go ahead and bring into the conversation one of our good friends and one of these investigative journalists on the street exposing transparency, Mr. Mark Taylor Canfield.
Good morning.
Good morning, Mark. It is so good to speak with you. If folks are just joining us, we have on the line now with us a friend of our show, and he's a fantastic investigative journalist. He's a musician. He is an actor. He blogs at Huffington Post, at Daily Kos, at truthout.org, on OpEd News, also on Free Speech Radio News on the Pacifica Network. You can find him on Facebook, facebook.com/mtaylorcanfield, and on Twitter. Mark, good morning. Thanks for joining us.
Good morning. You made me sound really busy. No wonder I'm so tired this morning.
Yeah. I've got our coffee here, so be sure to...
Oh, you're ahead of me on that one.
No. we couldn't get up this early without coffee, man, that's for sure. So... But you are busy, and you're doing a lot of reporting. And Mark, tell us some of the things that you've been getting into recently.
Well, my main focus lately has been on two issues. One is press freedom, especially in the United States, but also around the world. I've been following the events in the Ukraine pretty closely, and also reporting on local news here in Seattle, mainly our $15 an hour minimum wage campaign, and also an effort to bring progressive media voices back to the Seattle, Portland area, which we can definitely talk more about. But
yeah,
those are my main focuses these days. But I would let everybody know that once a week there is a national press briefing call through the interoccupy.org website, and we do invite journalists and activists from all over the country, sometimes politicians and other folks on to talk about what's going on in the country. So if folks want to get involved with that, you can go to interoccupy, that's interoccupy.org, and that's been going on for several years now, ever since the Occupy movement sort of hit its stride. And that call is still continuing.
That's great.
And so we're hearing a lot about the XL pipeline marches, and a lot of activity that's going to be starting, I guess, next month in a few days.
Mark, and speaking of the Occupy movement, you're in Seattle, and talking about the $15 an hour minimum wage campaign. One of the leading figures behind that movement is the newly elected Seattle city council member, who self-described Occupy movement candidate, right, and socialist candidate. You want to talk about Kshama Sawant and the $15 an hour minimum wage there that's going on in Seattle, where you're at, Mark?
Yes, well, it's a very, very interesting story for several reasons. One, Kshama Sawant has gained international attention after her victory, her underdog victory. No one actually expected her to win the election for the Seattle City Council seat in November. In fact, the night of the election, I interviewed her, and she had already said that she probably wasn't going to win. She'd already basically given up on the race, thinking that it wasn't possible to beat Richard Conlon, who'd been on the city council as long as I can remember. And so it was assumed that he had a really invincible seat, let's say, that there was no way that he was going to lose. But he did. Richard Conlon actually gave a concession speech about a week and a half later, after all the votes had finally been counted. And coming from several thousand votes from behind, she actually won the election with enough of a margin that there was no recount. So Councilmember Conlon gave her a lot of creds, actually, and I've never seen anything like it, Jacob. By the way, it's really great to talk to you, and I've been following what you and Scott have been doing since you guys started Filter Free Radio, so I wanted to give a shout-out to you for all your hard work on that,
well,
and
thank
the Tom
you, man.
Hartman Show as well.
Scott's here with us. You can say hi, Scott.
Hey,
Hey
Mark, I
Scott, how
miss you,
you
buddy.
doing?
Not bad, man. I miss you, man. I
Yeah,
remember the days of talking to you during the Occupy movement back in 2011. It was great.
yeah. Well, most people don't realize I was a reporter for Free Speech Radio News for almost 10 years there before I became an activist in the Occupy movement, and so my journalism has continued. And a shout out to Free Speech Radio News because unfortunately they went off the air last year,
Yeah.
sort of a funding crisis.
Right.
But they have been one of the, in fact, I would say right up front that they are the most gung-ho journalists and editors that I've ever worked with. They're really amazing people. They've got reporters all over the world reporting on stories that no one else is talking about, and really keeping up on the cutting edge of media. And that's a whole subject, that we could talk about because through Free Speech Radio News and places like that, I've been able to interview Dr. Vandana Shiva and Daniel Ellsberg and all sorts of amazing people. So
Nice.
shout out to Free Speech Radio News. It looks like we're back. The website is back now, and actually journalists are writing for the website now, which is something that really wasn't happening before. It was just a straight audio newscast that went out to college stations and community stations all around the country through the Pacifica Radio Network. The people who paid me were actually called Pacifica Reporters Against Censorship. So you can see that there was already a move underfoot for independence from the Pacifica Network. And it looks like we are at this point free. We are no longer directly connected to the Pacifica Network. It's an independent website now, and we're hoping that it will be back on the air on a lot of radio stations again very soon, because the initial contacts with those radio stations have been very positive, and they're willing to pay for the service. So yay, we can pay reporters again. That'll be great. 'Cause there's great people all over the world. I keep thinking of Sam Olakoya in Africa reporting these crazy stories in the middle of government crises and huge protests against ExxonMobil and all this stuff. So really amazing stuff. Then
I was just going to say, Mark, and that really speaks to the free press being under attack here in the United States and the media suppression. And this new report from the World Press Freedom Index, 2014 World Press Freedom Index, that says now the U.S. is ranked 46th overall now in terms of press freedom. And it's like, if you want to tell the truth anymore, you've got to go independent.
Glenn Greenwald is in Brazil. Greg Palast is, in the UK. So sometimes that's what happens. And as an American journalist, I cannot be proud of the fact that we are so low on this World Press Freedom Index. It's put together by a group that does advocacy worldwide for reporters called Reporters Without Borders. And if people want to get the details on the report for this year's World Press Freedom Index, you can go to rsf.org. That's for Reporters Sans Frontières, which is the French name because originally that group started in France. But they track freedom of the press all over the world and the treatment of journalists. And last year we were actually 37th, so we slipped again. The slip began actually during the Occupy movement when a lot of reporters and live streamers were arrested, and even Associated Press reporters were getting rounded up at these protests. This year, the ranking has dropped largely because of the treatment of whistleblowers. So you can see how that's playing out in the world press, and it is a major concern of mine, and it's something that as a journalist I have to focus on and keep bringing up over and over again, because to tell you the truth, guys, the corporate media nor the alternative media for the most part wants to talk about the story, simply because reporting that you're so low on the World Press Freedom List in comparison to other developed nations that you basically these media outlets don't want to report it because it undermines their own credibility as journalists. And news media. So there you go. That's
Right.
that's the problem
Well, that's
there.
ironic.
And whatever happened to that constitutional right of the Fifth Amendment where we can't incriminate ourselves? Or how about the First Amendment that says we have a right to a free press? Dun, dun, dun. Transparency,
Yeah,
my ass. Sorry.
We should be watching Finland, I guess, because they are usually number one. They've been number one for the last couple of years. But there are countries in North Africa, too, that are ahead of us on the list. Costa Rica is ahead of us on that list. So, yeah, we really need to start looking at what's going on in the United States. Part of that is also the Federal Communications Commission regulations and policies regarding corporate media consolidation, which is another big subject I like to talk about.
Yeah.
I did testify before the FCC at a hearing on media consolidation and brought up two reports that the FCC itself had commissioned, which showed the negative effects of corporate media consolidation in the United States, including reduced minority and female ownership of the media and also reduced local news. However, the FCC commissioners claimed that they didn't know anything about these reports that they themselves had funded. So it was really a slap in the face to me. I was standing there with the documents in my hand, and yet they claimed they didn't know anything about these reports. I even got a call from the chairman's office, which at that time was Colin Powell's brother, Michael Powell. He was the chairman of the FCC, and he and the Republicans on the FCC went full on for media consolidation and ignored all of this testimony around the country. We had two friends on the commission at that time, Adelstein and Copps, who both sided with the community radio stations and journalists, but they were pushed aside, and media consolidation pushed through. There was a great map on Brad Friedman's website, Bradblog, that showed the red radio stations versus the blue radio stations in the United States. And what you're finding is that progressive and liberal media is disappearing quickly since the days of Air America. And what is being replaced by are a lot of Clear Channel owned and Fox radio stations, which are heavy right-wing. We're talking Rush Limbaugh, Michael Savage, Glenn Beck, our guy from up here in Washington. And basically it's taking over the country. So in a lot of parts of the nation, if you're trying to listen to the radio, the only thing you're going to hear is right-wing talk, sports radio, or religious broadcasting.
Yeah, I know.
And
I know the media is liberal because Rush Limbaugh, Bill O'Reilly, Ann Coulter, Glenn Beck, Laura Ingraham, Pat Buchanan, Pat Robertson, Sean Hannity, and Rusty Humphreys told me so.
Well, that's the thing, is these folks like Limbaugh and Hannity and Beck are signed to exclusive contracts. So they are being paid, like $26 million a year in the case of Limbaugh to do these radio programs. And what happened was the network decided to buy their talent, so they signed them to exclusive contracts. The problem is, Jacob and Scott, and Norman Goldman actually was in town a month ago, gave a great presentation on what I'm going to tell you. So it's coming straight from him. And he's been meeting with media consultants, and this is the story. By the way, that event up here in Seattle was put together by Progressive Radio Northwest, and you can go to their website. It's spelled out progressiveradionorthwest.org. They've been sponsoring media forums up here in Seattle, trying to bring a lot of these voices, like Nicole Sandler, Randy Rhodes, Mike Malloy, Norman Goldman, folks like that, back to the air in Seattle. And what Norman told us is that Clear Channel borrowed billions of dollars from Bain Capital, by the way, to buy up 880 radio stations around the country. There's another group called Cumulus, and they have also bought up hundreds and hundreds of stations. Well, Clear Channel did basically a leveraged buyout. They borrowed all this money from Bain Capital at very high interest rates, and subsequently are losing their audience and losing money. So a lot of these corporate networks are turning their stations over to sports radio. That's what happened in Seattle. We had KPTK, which was our progressive talk station. It was owned by CBS, and it was sold off. And now we have the fifth sports radio station in Seattle. Now, given that the Seahawks kicked,
Hey, yeah,
Peyton Manning's butt, and the Denver Broncos in the Super Bowl, that was great. But what happens is that they basically are putting they're dumping the loans, the debt, onto the local stations, and in order to make money, they're doing sports radio because it's extremely cheap. And even if you're the third or fourth in the ranking, as far as listenership in your area, you can still make money doing sports radio. So that's what's happening. So it's a little bit ridiculous that we have so much sports radio in Seattle, but that's the way it is now.
It is ridiculous. And Mark, that's exactly what happened here in Portland, where I'm at. I was a producer for the Tom Hartman program when Tom still broadcasted live out of Portland, Oregon at KPOJ at Clear Channel. And I worked at Clear Channel with Tom Hartman in Portland up until we moved the show to Washington, D.C. I went to D.C. for a couple of years, too. But that's exactly what happened here in Portland. We used to have a progressive radio station, KPOJ, Portland's Progressive Talk, AM 620, owned by Clear Channel, owned by Bain Capital. And the Friday after the 2012 election that Romney lost, that Friday, that week, they flipped KPOJ to Fox Sports Radio. And now it's Fox Sports 620. And Portland already has 2 or 3 other sports stations. We've got AM 1080 The Fan. We've got 750 The Game. And now, no more progressive talk, but we have a third sports station. Thank you, Bain Capital.
Bread and circus.
Yeah, it's very similar to what happened in 2008. If you look at it, look at what happened on Wall Street and some of the large banking firms and financial firms. Many of their representatives, by the way, are really a big part of the Obama administration. But we're talking Lehman Brothers and those folks. But what happens is that the money is borrowed. The CEOs they take their cut by charging fees for their services, and then they usually get their golden umbrella when they leave. So to them, it doesn't really matter. They don't care about the audience. They don't care about the employees. What they're doing is they're stripping the stations of all of their resources to try to pay back Bain Capital. And according to Norman Goldman, 80% over the last few years, 80% of radio employees are now gone. 80%. Yeah. So what you've got is automated programming coming out of Boston or New York or Chicago, LA. That's what you get in Seattle. You get one local sports station, and then all the rest of them are national networks. So most of the programming is coming from the East Coast. And that was one of the complaints here, by the way, in the sports world, was that, there's a big East Coast media bias against the West Coast teams, which is true.
Well, there is, damn it, but that's...
I did get a chance to talk to Steve Largent, our Hall of Fame wide receiver up here in Seattle.
Republican.
About that. He agreed that there is a huge media bias in the sports world, and, that's true also in news in general, although I do have to say that Seattle does get a lot of attention news-wise for a city its size, but I think that's just because there's so many major corporations, Starbucks, Boeing, Microsoft, Amazon, Google, are all trying to be headquartered here now.
It's a big market. Seattle's it's like top 15 market, too, I think.
Excuse me?
Seattle's a big market, too. I think it's like top 15 the media markets.
Yes, you're right. But compared to New York or Chicago, LA, that's still small. So we have to keep that in mind. But, it's a major issue, this whole subject. I mean, if it hadn't been for, here's the point, and it's not surprising that Clear Channel would sell that station right after the election, because without progressive political voices on the air, it's very difficult for progressive politics, even in a city like Seattle. You need to have people on the air talking about the $15 an hour minimum wage campaign, which we started the program, talking about. Because if you don't, then, the media actually has been very effective in swinging political campaigns in the past. So it comes back to this political issue of Why are these voices being suppressed? And if you talk to folks like Tom Hartman, he'll tell you that, Clear Channel definitely has a right-wing bias. So there you go. It's people buying the system, just like, the whole Citizen United decision has changed everything. And we had our own experience with that with GMO labeling. There was an initiative last year, Initiative 522, and of course Monsanto and DuPont and the Grocery Manufacturers Association, which includes everybody, basically, that has anything to do with GMOs, spent so much money that they just squashed, the campaign. And that's what happens when you don't have voices in the media. You don't have a diversity of voices representing alternative points of view. Luckily in Seattle, we were surprisingly able to elect a very alternative candidate for our city council. So issues like the $15 an hour minimum wage are getting attention here. Mm-hmm. And it is sort of setting a standard for the rest of the country, which I tend to be proud of. That's Seattle and Washington State is on the forefront of issues like same-sex marriage and legalization of marijuana, and now hopefully on this issue as well. But if folks want to know more about the campaign in Seattle for $15 an hour, which is sort of also attracting a lot of attention from around the country and around the world, you can go to 15now.org, 15now.org, and follow that there. But there is a political issue here which ties into, the Federal Communications Commission and what happens in our national and local elections. There's also another group up in Seattle called the Northwest Progressive Institute, which has been working on these kinds of issues. But I was interested in actually asking you folks what was going on with the Portland station, because apparently there was a Kickstarter campaign and they raised, $250,000 or something, and were able to buy frequency.
Yes, it's a big deal, and it's so motivating and inspiring. I'm so happy you mentioned it, Mark, because Portland, we lost KPOJ in 2012, as we just mentioned, and since then we've got Community Radio KBOO, which is it's a great community radio station, and they do news, and they're pretty progressive. They play Amy Goodman's Democracy Now! KBOO's a little unorganized, and so it's tough to always, go back because it could be something different, and that's great. They're very diverse, but we don't have a progressive, real dedicated progressive station anymore, and folks have rallied around and basically built from the bottom up, grassroots, starting with a very simple idea. We don't have a progressive station anymore in Portland. Portland is a very progressive place. The audience here needs, there is a demand for the service and the product. And so people came together, they organized, they got a couple of ideas, they got a website, it's xray.fm. And big part thanks to the FCC decision on low-powered FM frequencies, which is a great thing for community radio stations across the country to give strength and power to the community radio stations. And folks in Portland said, okay, let's do it. They applied for a license, and they're going through the application processes, and they got a website up, and they said, hey, we're trying to bring progressive radio back to Portland. Is anybody interested? They started a Kickstarter. They said, hey, if you can give us a few $1,000, we can build a very limited and basic studio. We can broadcast. We'll bring back Tom Hartman. We'll bring back Norman Goldman. We'll bring back, Adam Klugman, and we'll bring back Carl Wolfson on the air and do progressive radio. And they started out with a goal of somewhere around, I think, $10,000 or $15,000, which, it sounds like a lot of money. You need that much money to build a decent station and, transmitters and antennas and towers and these things. Cost a lot of money. They, like you mentioned, Mark, they were only asking like $10,000, $15,000, and they got over like something like $200,000, $250,000 people kicked in. And so it's just, for me, it was so inspiring and motivating to see how many people support that idea, how many people want to get behind this. And for me, I'm no longer thinking along the lines of, people don't get it. People do get it. We just have to provide the means for which people can get active. And one of the ways we can do that, like you're talking about, is bringing back progressive voices, bringing back the truth for we the people to the public airwaves. I mean, that's the whole point of the public airwaves, is to provide the public with a service. And
as Chris Hedges says, the problem we have with building a resistance movement is not ideological, it is logistical.
right. And so now there is a very well-funded, by the people, community radio station for the people, who's going to be starting broadcasting. They're going to be live on the FM dial. They're not going to have a huge reach. Of course, it's a very limited operation. As you know, even $250,000 doesn't get you that big of a radio reach. I know it sounds crazy.
Yeah,
but
that's one of the things I wanted to mention, is that in order to buy the CBS frequency up here that KPTK was on, we're going to have to come up with $6 million.
yeah,
So it's the problem with the fact that the public airways have been commercialized to the point where it's very difficult to get access to those frequencies, which is part of the reason why we slipped on the World Press Freedom Index. There is some hope for the future as Clear Channel and other folks default on their loans. There may be some spaces opening up for progressive voices again.
Yeah.
I'm hoping that in Seattle we can create our own sort of network, and that would be really great. I want to be a part of that. I want to be on the ground floor. I want my own program. You guys have inspired me.
Heck yeah.
I spend so much time on other people's shows, I might as well do my own at some point. But we do have David Goldstein here, who is working on this project as well. He is famous for his liberal blog, Horse's Ass, and he's also famous for starting the Drinking Liberally group, which meets at local pubs to
no
talk
shit.
about politics.
Yeah. True, honest to God, true story. I met Skeptical Scott at a Drinking Liberally event, and that's how we became friends. True story.
Awesome. Well, there's also Job Parrish here, who was a Seattle Weekly writer for years. He had a column called Mosback, which was awesome. Really great political coverage on the national and local scene. But he was taken, he lost his position at the Seattle Weekly when they stripped down. So it's not just happening, in the audio media. It's the newspapers, the Seattle Post-Intelligencer is now only online, and the Seattle Times have cut their staff to the bone, which is typical. In fact, Frank Blethen, I think we may have talked about this, actually gave Dino Rossi, the Republican candidate for governor here, I think it was $80,000 in free advertisements, and there was a one-day protest at the Seattle Times where all of the reporters and staff basically walked out and signed a letter and protest that it was a violation of journalistic and editorial ethics.
Hey.
But that's what's happening to the media, and I'm just hoping, we're watching Portland, definitely. I hear a lot of talk amongst the progressive Radio Northwest people up here about what you guys are doing in Portland, but there are many different models that people are working with. One of them is sponsorship models, and two programs that I work with occasionally are the Fallon Forum, excuse me, that's Fallon Forum, FORUM.com. He's a guy out of Des Moines, Iowa, actually, who is a radio guy. There's also somebody from Portland, Carl Wolfson, who's doing things online now, who should be involved in some of this stuff. But Ed Fallon in Des Moines, and then Jeff Santos out of Boston with the Revolution Radio Network, that's AM 1510 there. They have sponsorships for their programs, and so what they get is they get a labor union or some local nonprofit, to basically underwrite the program, which is sort of a public radio model, right, but they're using it for commercial radio. And another thing I want to mention is that it's been very surprising to me lately to realize that these efforts to bring back, voices like Tom Hartman and others to the air. And by the way, he is on KBCS up here, which is my former station. It's a Pacifica affiliate.
Oh, right.
But there is a competition actually going on between public radio and these commercial efforts. Because if you look at the market, the competition for this kind of progressive talk ends up being national public radio Pacifica Radio, public radio.
Right.
Now, a lot of people love public radio, and I have no problem with it. It's sustained me, most of my life. But I hate pledge drives. I really, really hate them because not only do they force the volunteers and employees to get on the air and, talk up the station for hours and hours at a time, it interrupts programming. You tune into the program you normally listen to that week, and all of a sudden you've got a half-hour pledge drive going on. So it's like listening to religious broadcasting or something. It can really be annoying, and that's just my personal opinion. I'm not trying to say anything bad about public radio. I'm just saying that there is a competition here. So Tom Hartman is actually on a public radio station in Seattle, but not a commercial station. And so that's another aspect of the whole story that isn't being talked about much. There are efforts on an international and national level for a lot of journalists who kind of came out of the woodwork during the Occupy movement, but many of them were there before. Like there's a group called the Media Consortium, which are the people who started this national press briefing that we do every week at noon on Thursdays Pacific time. But the whole situation is that we're facing, a problem where a lot of alternative media journalists are struggling. A lot of them don't really have a voice, and there are a few places where you can actually get your stuff published to get on the air. So we've been trying to work on that issue for the last year or two. There is an international media coalition on Facebook where people are working on this issue. And there are ongoing efforts to bring all of these networks together. You've got, Radio or Not is one of those efforts. And so what would be great would be to have some kind of hub where a lot of this progressive stuff would be on the same website, and we could all kind of find each other and support each other. It's definitely a mutual assistance kind of project.
Absolutely.
And a lot of the networking is just getting the word out, because I would say the number one issue in a lot of respects, once you've gotten the technical side down, is getting the word out. These corporate networks have millions of dollars for their advertising and publicity campaigns, but you don't see Randy Rhoads' face on a billboard anywhere.
Right.
It's just the way it is.
Well,
we don't have the money in the alternative media to do that, so it has to be word of mouth and networking. Otherwise, it doesn't happen.
Amen. Grassroots, bottom up. It's the only way we're going to do it. It's impossible, damn near, to get, like Walmart to advertise on our show if we're going to sit here and bash Walmart for outsourcing, not paying their employees a living wage, and the vast wealth inequality that the Waltners create. Or it's going to be impossible to get BP to give us a couple of bucks to do our show if we're talking about how BP is part of the fossil fuel industry, which is part of the cause of climate change and eventually the extinction of the human being species. So it's pretty, when you stop and think about it, it's like a no duh. Why would these big corporations want to pay us to badmouth them? It's pretty obvious. And so then you see, well, how come the Rush Limbaughs of the world are on 600 radio stations and making millions and millions and millions of dollars? Oh, maybe it's because they're touting the line of their corporate sponsors that the corporate sponsors want them to, and they mislead the public and don't tell them the truth because it's all about the money.
That's a great point, Jacob. I'm going to steal that, actually, and use it in my webinars because... let's say borrow it.
No, take it, man. Run with it.
Well, here's the thing. I would put it this way. It's difficult to get supporter sponsorship, advertising money from a corporation that you're busy worrying whether they're going to sue you for what you've just reported.
Yeah, no shit.
So, yes. But at the same time, I do have to say, and this comes straight from the horse's mouth, so to speak, Norman Goldman, is that folks like Sean Hannity have lost 60% of their audience. The demographics for that kind of right-wing broadcasting, the average age is about 65 now. They're losing their audience. They're losing money and they're losing their audience, but the networks are stuck with these big contracts that they have to pay for at least the next year or two. But here's the surprising information is that a lot of those folks, the Rush Limbaughs and Glenn Beck's and Sean Hannity's, are actually on a lot of blacklists when it comes to advertisers because of the controversy that they've stirred up. In other words, some of these advertisers have been the subject of boycott campaigns, etc., because of the broadcasts that the right-wingers are doing. So it's actually a problem for them as well at this point. And what's surprising is that folks like Thom Hartmann or Norman Goldman don't have those kinds of issues with advertisers. So yes, maybe BP isn't going to advertise on their program, but they don't have some of the political, what would you call it, baggage that Hannity and some of the others have. There aren't people going after them. There's just people who don't like them because they have big mouths, basically.
Yeah.
And I'm sure Norman Goldman would cop to that and say, yes, I do.
Yeah, sure.
Which is one reason why you're probably not going to hear him, or at this point, Nicole Sandler, or Randy Rhoads, or Mike Malloy on a public radio station.
Right.
Because, and this is just another opinion, off the cuff here, but a lot of public radio stations that I've not KBOO in Portland, definitely, but other radio stations tend to be moving more towards a NPR, PRI sort of format where it's kind of nice and pleasant.
Yeah.
We'll tell you the bad news, but we'll also, make sure that you know where the best coffee is in town, and, we'll be very relaxed while we're telling you. Well, outlets like Free Speech Video News are not like that. We've never tried to pretty things up. We just tell it like it is, just the facts, man.
That's it.
As
and
Dragnet,
it is just the facts. And I want to be clear real quick. When I was producing for Thom Hartmann, Tom would talk about all the time. I would love to have Walmart advertise on my program. I'm not against Walmart advertising and running commercials on my program and paying me to do so, because I'm going to turn around and bash them on the air. It's some people are beholden to their corporate sponsors, and some people just want to tell the truth. And as far as filter-free radio is concerned, if BP or Walmart or whoever wants to advertise on our show, by all means, I will take your money and I will turn around and tell you the truth, that you guys are the problem. So in case anyone wants to give us money, hey, just saying, gotta throw that one out.
Such is the problem with commercial radio.
Well, Free Speech Radio News is amazing, and maybe not surprising that they went off the air last year for a while, because they have never accepted any corporate sponsorship. Of course, they have always been a part of the Pacifica radio network up until this point, so it's a subscriber-based. But that was what was always amazing to me, is that, working for a place that just doesn't have that kind of funding actually does free your hands editorially to talk about things. I mean, I never had, ever had anyone at Free Speech Radio News tell me this is too controversial,
Yeah.
Or, we might get in trouble if we report this. That's the whole point of Free Speech Radio News, is to report things that aren't being reported. And I think that that's where my focus lies on a lot of these issues, is as a journalist, there's no reason for me to talk about what everyone else is talking about. There are hundreds of people out there reporting on the latest celebrity scandal or whatever. They don't need me to talk about it. My job is to find stories that aren't being reported and focus on them and give them the attention that they need to get, and to go on Thom Hartmann's show, which I do regularly still, and Mike Malloy's show, on Norman Goldman's show, and others, to talk up, issues that aren't getting the attention. Now, if it wasn't for folks like Nicole Sandler, Jeff Santos, and Ed Fallon, and these other folks, a lot of these stories wouldn't get attention at all. So not having those voices on the air is a form of censorship, because it really does create censorship in the media. And that's another website people should check out, obviously, is Project Censorship, because they do some great work. And they're also open to grassroots journalists contacting them with their own stories and trying to get these issues out there. But there are few and far places that do that.
Yeah.
Although Project Censorship does have a report that it comes out with, just like Reporters Without Borders, once a year, with the top censored stories, and they do tend to get coverage of that. It ends up in the New York Times, and places like that. So Thank goodness. That's a think tank basically that is run by a professor in media. And so what you've got is a lot of academicians involved in that too. So it's a good thing, but most of these voices are few and far between.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's, in the quote alternative media or independent media is how I like to term it. Folks are really hungry. We know there's an audience out there. There's a huge audience in Portland and Seattle, the two most progressive cities in the country. And so it's just a matter of who wants to put up the money, and who wants to do the work and who wants to grab hold of this market share. Right now, it's monopolized by these corporate stations, or in Seattle, I would say, stations that are pretty mainstream, even if they consider themselves political talk radio. They're just not going to take on a lot of the stories that I'm covering, which is frustrating for me, of course, because I live in Seattle, so I can't figure out, why KIRO doesn't do some of the stories that I want to talk about.
Yeah, right.
And I have to go to Boston and talk to Jeff Santos in order to get the word out, but that's just the way it is.
And at least you're doing it, man. At least you're doing it.
Somebody's got to. That's the other thing, is that my motto as a journalist, and it's also, I think I told you guys through Facebook, I'm writing this detective novel set in Seattle in 1947, and one of the characters is a journalist, and he says straight up in the book, my job is to comfort the afflicted and afflict the comfortable.
Hell
the rich
yeah.
folks don't need me standing up for them. They got plenty of attorneys.
Hell yes.
Big-time media people backing them. It's the grassroots movements and the community, local community voices, and some of these international stories that aren't being covered. They're the ones who need some kind of, if not advocacy journalism, at least someone needs to report on what's going on. So to me, that's what a good journalist should be thinking when they're doing their story. Not how much money am I making or am I going to get on TV today. It's, because there's the bandwagon effect. Everybody wants to report the same story.
Right.
I think, really what people should do is investigative journalism. If not investigative journalism, at least hard-nosed, straight-up news reporting. And I just don't hear that much of that in the United States anymore. It's difficult. You have to go online, basically, and that's the other part of the story, is that all of these people that we've been talking about are now online, live streaming and broadcasting. They're struggling to sustain their networks and their programming financially, but technologically they're actually way ahead of a lot of other folks. In fact, public radio is not necessarily that good at keeping up with the technology. They still think that the tower, that radio tower, should be their focus of attention, and it really is not.
Right.
And KEXP, which is a music station here in Seattle, although Job Parrish, the guy I mentioned before, the journalist, has a program called Mind Over Matters every Saturday morning on that station. Most of it is music, and it's Paul Allen's station, basically. But they're smart enough that they've gone to the web as their source of an audience. So they have an international audience, and they are actually even promoting and sponsoring music concerts in New York City. So that tells you that, some folks have figured it out. Norman Goldman pointed to his smartphone and said, "This is the new transistor radio, folks. So get that through your heads." So we have to start thinking that way. Also, multimedia.
Yep.
People don't just want to listen to an audio signal anymore. I mean, it's great for me, when I'm doing my dishes or something, to be able to listen to it in the background. Mm-hmm. But a lot of folks, they want to watch the live stream of the broadcast on their smartphone, in transit or whatever. And also they like text, they like articles to go with the stories that they hear on the air. So people are really into multimedia these days, and I think the idea of radio as an audio signal is out the door, just like the idea of television, which is basically just that cathode ray tube with all that lead and cadmium or whatever. That's out the window too.
Yeah.
That's not what media is. Media is now multimedia, so everyone actually can have their own radio, TV station, news network. All they have to do is put in the time and effort. The technology is there.
You're the man, Mark. We're out of time. I got to touch base with our news report here in about 30 seconds. Mark Taylor Canfield, journalist, musician, actor, blogging at Huffington Post, Daily Kos, truthout.org, and Pacifica Network from Seattle. Find him on Facebook, facebook.com/M Taylor Canfield, and on Twitter. Mark, it's always a pleasure to speak with you, man. And let's do it again soon, and keep up the good work out there, buddy.
Ditto, and keep an eye on the 15-hour minimum wage campaign in Seattle. They're going to try to push the city council to pass an ordinance by April, and if they don't, there will be a citywide forum, and they'll run it as a citywide referendum to be on the ballot for November. So keep an eye on that. Keep up the good work, guys. It's great to hear you on the air, and a shout out to Nicole Sandler too. She's doing awesome work. So you guys keep the faith, and help inspire me and the others, and we'll push forward on this. And sooner or later, we'll have our own national progressive radio networks and TV networks. It'll be awesome. You just wait. Just wait.
I can't wait, man. And sign me up. Whatever we can do, we're on board. Mark Taylor Canfield, always a pleasure, buddy, and we'll talk soon.
Okay, check me out on Facebook and Twitter, folks. I'm covering all these stories there, so have a good day. See you later.
Fantastic. Thanks again, Mark. Talk to you soon, man.
Okay, bye.
Mark Taylor Canfield, journalist, activist, blogger, facebook.com/mtaylorcanfield. Find him on Twitter. And the conversation that we had this morning is exactly what Mark writes about, reports on, covers. We've been friends with Mark since, Occupy Wall Street a couple of years ago now, 3 years ago now. Back when Mark was kind of initiating some of the coverage of what was happening in Seattle, when the grandma got pepper sprayed, Mark was there. When Cornel West was speaking at Occupy Seattle, Mark was there, and so much more. So it's always a pleasure.